but they would be allowed to gain weight. What I found was when you control people's diet, it doesn't matter a bit whether they're drinking aspartame or sugar-sweetened beverage. Nobody gains weight because it's not, even if sugar does promote excess food consumption, it's the pizza and the French fries and the cookies that are probably being consumed in excess. It is not our carefully formulated enchilada casserole. And so none of our subjects gained weight. And so I really learned how hard it's going to be to say sugar causes people to overconsume other calories and hold everything constant.
Yeah.
It's when people are living in the real world that sugar consumption may cause over you to consume other foods in excess. So I don't think we're ever going to have the randomized control trial to perfectly answer that question.
I just wanted to add to that. I mean, I agree completely. I mean, to do the size of studies, randomized control trials, to provide the convincing proof, whether it's taking away sugar-sweetened beverages or adding them, is going to be virtually unfundable. But I was talking to Stephen about this earlier. You know, in my mind, in some ways, the sugar-sweetened beverage tax programs are our best hope, actually, for convincing proof. If any of those show even marginal benefit, you know, by adding a 5% tax that marginally reduces intake, if any of those show a convincing, even small public health benefit, that will be the convincing. That will be, in my mind, that's the randomized controlled trial, and the politics around it are the IRB. But that's it.
Also, the public health advocates that I work with in Sacramento do have an answer to your question with regards very specifically, what evidence do we need to help us get sugar-sweetened beverages passed? And this was all before this new preemption that Barry was talking about, where there's going to be no local sugar-sweetened beverage taxes in California now for 12 years. But they've identified the biggest gap in knowledge that is holding up legislators at the state level from getting behind a sugar-sweetened beverage tax is our lack of data comparing sugar-sweetened beverage to solid sugar. You know, the Mattis study with the jelly beans and the sugar-sweetened beverage is the closest we've gotten to doing it concurrently. And they believe very strongly we need more evidence along that line.
I'll just make one sort of philosophical comment in that there is no perfect study. So it comes down to looking at the totality of the evidence. Not only the randomized controlled trials, but all of these well-done prospective observational studies that can provide insights. You know, David and I have taken a step back, and we're currently doing nutrition studies where we're providing all of the food, really taking a step back and trying to do these rigorously controlled dietary intervention studies. Doing just one of these studies costs over $12 million. So, you know, to try to isolate sugar-sweetened beverages and do a study like that, I think may not be feasible. And so I agree with the comment about the sugar-sweetened beverages, the sugar-sweetened beverage tax, and also considering the totality of the evidence from all types of studies.
Thank you. Thank you all for a fantastic session. I have a question for Dr. Manella. This is not exactly in the scope of your talk, but I was wondering about the relationship between sweet taste preference and satiety. So for example, if you're at your most preferred sugar concentration, are you more likely to be satisfied, less likely to be satisfied, or they're totally independent of each other?
That's a really good question. If you look at some of the early infant work, just even going back to Filer, that was the one thing you could add it to you could add it to anything, and the child within a meal will eat more, probably because it tastes better. Really, when you look at some of these long-term self-regulation studies, methods are mixed, how you ask is missed. Some of the stuff that Janina Pepino had done, so if you look at obese children versus normal weight children, the level of sweetness most preferred is the same. I think we have to start thinking about these other phenotypes that you're referring to. So for example, for obese children, it doesn't work for the cold water bath. You know, whether this level is mirroring something up here, whether it's mirroring reward or something, but I think that's really kind of salient. You could look at just responses to repetitive exposure. This is in an older age adult. You can see that where they'll differ is in that they don't habituate to it as much as like a normal weight do. So I think those types of paradigms, and that's kind of what, how do you ask the child or the adult those types of questions? We've got to get beyond, you know, what do you want to eat or what do you eat, but try to understand what that food is doing. I think, you know, in the absence of thinking the role that sweet taste, whatever it may be coming from, is playing for some children, or it's making them feel better. And so maybe having a role beyond what we know, that we need to address those issues before we can cut sugar intake. So I don't have the answer to it, but I think where you're going is important, because I think we need to explore this at many different levels and more than one phenotype to try to get at this very powerful biological signal, which is food, and try to understand what it is and how to change it, because it's really, really difficult to change.
Thank you.
Thanks.
I had a question about the taste. Is it changing over time all the way through adulthood? And how are those taste
So
preferences
the biggest changes happens during mid-adolescence, where you get the decrease. You actually start preferring lower levels of salt and sweet, and then less bitter. For the other senses, probably olfaction changes a little bit more in the elderly, but there are some taste changes, but not as pronounced. It's really during this developmental time that you get this shift in preference. Now, obviously, what you eat, what types of medicines you're taking, obviously the taste system is really, you know, a target for radiation and a lot of other insults. And so, yeah, it can change, but normal aging, you'll get some changes in some of the bitters. You might get some, but it's not as pronounced as what happens early on. But some are more resilient than others. Taste is more resilient than smell. It's olfaction. You often think a food doesn't taste good. It's probably more due to the sense of olfaction than it is actual taste. So that's what I would look for in the elderly.
And then I had a question. I'm interested in oral health and public health. So I was wondering about any of the intervention studies of looking at outcomes related to body mass, but also changes in tooth decay, or even the
We've
policy
never
studies.
looked at it, no. It's not something we looked at, but there certainly are. I don't have the references off the top of my
Well,
head.
I know of some, but the whole idea of the sweetened beverages and things, it's not always, those groups haven't always tied together.
Right. Email me,
Okay.
and I will see me after this, and I will aim to get you a relevant reference.
I know some of the references, but I'm just suggesting more.
Oh,
More
okay.
bigger studies.
Okay.
that we need
Yeah, we've recently been contacted by some dentists who are very interested in looking at the mouth microbiome and thinking through some of these things in the context of nutrition interventions.
And one thing that we found in some studies that I was involved with and have seen other publications is in some racial ethnic groups, the eruption of teeth is different, and so then tooth decay rates differ related to exposure to sugars at different
Right, more effect modification, yeah. An area that really does warrant additional research. Thank you.
And it's also a risk factor, can predict obesity. And so one of the issues is that the earlier the tooth is erupted, the more that's the greater risk for later dental caries. I know in Philadelphia, some of Jenny Fisher's work, where mothers weren't concerned about obesity. What they're concerned about is dental caries, which is the most prevalent disease of childhood, as you know.
I have really basic questions. So 10 years ago, we are always thinking about cholesterol is bad one, right? But now we're thinking about sugar is bad one. So we're pointing out sugar is the main cause to obesity. But basically, obesity is coming from input and output. So more calorie is we getting obese, right? But we still need to point that out. The sugar is the main causing factor, So I'm thinking about, so we need to focus on more total calorie intake to solve the problem of obesity, the incidence increase.
Love
So what do you think?
thermodynamics.
I think I wouldn't have ever written main cause. I would be more like a contributor. Not that brave.
I think when you talk about dietary intake, you want to be careful about just talking about total calorie intake. There's a lot of data suggesting that the quality of the calories matter, and I think that's one of the impetuses for a symposium like this, thinking about getting calories from sugar and what is that doing to us metabolically. If we're getting calories from refined grain products, that's probably not a good thing either. So I don't think the intent here is to suggest that sugar is the only, villain. There are many things contributing, but I would caution against just thinking about total calories and really think about the quality of calories and how that affects not only body weight, but also other diseases and risk factors for those diseases.
I was just wondering about something that was not talked so much today, like the non-caloric sweeteners. How much scientific evidence is about side effects of these sweeteners?
I didn't.
Yeah, I think there's a whole session on that tomorrow.
Okay.
Entire.
That's good.
So you have to come tomorrow. You're gonna have to come tomorrow.
And a second question was, I guess for any of you, that we talk a lot about compliance and kids' education, but how important is, according to you, parents' education about this?
Hugely important. That's where the kids get a lot of their food is what the parents bring home. That's why in all of our interventions, there is a component that focuses specifically on the parents.
And it's why I only study parents. Not the kids.
We heard this morning about social agents, identifying that right agent of change. How effective are you in your research and daily activities that comes into play?
What was the question?
That's an interesting question. I've worked for 22 years with the same mentor, and